We're a global company. We've got people in, I think, like every time zone. I mean, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's someone working here. Early days, I don't invest in companies where the founders can't align on where to live.
It depends for what your business is and what your ultimate goals and outcomes, what you're trying to achieve. Teams being co-located and being together, there's a huge advantage there. Is making fast decisions more important than having the best people doing those decisions.
Hey everyone, this is Andy. Welcome to the What the FTE podcast, the podcast where we cut through the noise and talk about what's really happening in HR, hiring, and the future of work. Today, I'm chatting with our very own people and culture expert, Maya Bellay, someone who keeps us all in line, makes sure Certn stays great, and manages to do so with a smile. Maya, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much. That was such a solid intro, but let me return the favor. Y'all know Andy. Some may know him as Randy McLeod. He's Certn CEO, co-founder. What you might not know about him is that he's basically a walking encyclopedia on all things HR, tech, and scaling companies. And somehow he still finds time to be an AI innovator as of recently, across everything. Dare I say maybe ChatGPT's biggest fan at the moment. Definitely Dad of the Year. Check the vest. That's a new thing. And definitely keeping up with a few hobbies along the way. But I have to say he's lacking in the biking department as of lately. So
listen, biking and surf. For those of you that don't know, Maya and I have gone. We've been friends for like 6-7 years.
Yeah.
So Maya knows some of some of the changes that I've had to make in my life, probably including the ones around my midsection over the past 4 or 5 years of fatherhood.
Yeah. But before we dive in, I'll say a little bit about me. My name is Maya. As Andy mentioned, my pronouns are she and her, and I live, work, and play on the NCD territories of the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Esquimalt nations, also known as Victoria, BC. I was born in India, but I mostly grew up in BC, which means I'm also a textbook BC person. Camping, hiking, running, yoga, all of the things. That is what I love to do. You name it. On a more professional note, I've been in people and culture for about 5 years, covering everything from recruitment and onboarding to offboarding, terminations, and all the messy human moments in between, mostly in tech with a stint in nonprofit and retail. But I take a human-centered, collaborative, and creative approach to my work, and I'm passionate about using data to drive meaningful decisions. So, Andy?
In the last 5 years, you really have done it all. It's pretty incredible to see all of the things that you've managed to tackle and master over the last 5 years. So, yeah.
It's like I'm almost in an interview place, but, I like being on the other side of interviews, so not my comfort zone, but that's okay. I'm curious, what kind of HR trends are we diving into today? Where do you want to start?
Remote work. I mean, it was supposed to be the future, but now companies are forcing people to go back into the office. Is co-location actually better, or are we just nostalgic for the way that things used to be? What's your sense on that?
Yeah, I think it's such a challenge. I think we can kind of go, there's so many ways to go about it. And I have a tendency to think that, yes, like teams being co-located and being together, there's a huge advantage there. And ultimately, what I'm probably going to say across everything is it depends for what your business is and what your ultimate goals and outcomes, what you're trying to achieve, and then matching that back. So in some circumstances, and for example, like an early scaling business, it probably makes sense to be in the same area. You're trying to make quick decisions. And I know we've talked about this before, like having everyone in the same area just makes sense. And as you're growing into a global scaling organization, it's just simply not possible. And then you also have to balance that with the side of what kind of talent are we trying to access? Can we get that all in one location? And is making fast decisions more important than having the best people doing those decisions? So, there's so much kind of at play. I'm curious to hear what you think.
Well, I don't know that you need to compromise. I mean, making fast decisions and having the best people, that's kind of what we all strive for. But there can definitely be a lag, especially as you're considering time zones. I mean, for us, we're a global company. We've got people in, I think, like every time zone. I mean, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's someone working here. we couldn't do all that from Victoria. In fact, I think at one point, we probably with the number of employees we have, we would have had 100% of the people that work in tech in Victoria that would work for Certn if we had kept them all here in Victoria.
Truly.
Which is pretty wild to think about. For me, I completely agree. It depends on stage. Early days, I don't invest in companies where the founders can't align on where to live. If you can't have a group of founders that are in one place and can agree that they're going to live in one city, just to start, that's probably already a challenge. But as you get bigger, how do you figure out that balance of the best people and co-location?
I think that is the pickle that needs unpacking, and it is a really challenging one. Because I think there's some examples of areas that's been done really well, and there's so many different factors. So I don't know if there's like that consistent, across the board, this would be the best thing for everyone at all times. There's some teams that are excelling at this, and in some different areas of the business as well. There's some roles where you can work more independently, and there's some roles that are so team-based. And when I think of development, for example, or engineering teams, having them together and in the same area makes a huge difference than having them on totally different time zones. What do you think?
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree. Teams that need to make decisions quickly need to be co-located. So I think in the perfect world, you have, especially when you talk about product design and engineering, you've got a design lead, a product lead, and an engineering lead that are co-located, ideally in the same office, but most definitely in the same time zone. For most people that are software developers, computer scientists, engineers, like if you're an individual contributor, you don't always need to be in the same room. In fact, it can be kind of distracting when everyone's going out for lunch or, when there's all the social things happening. I know I find I always get sucked into those things. So working at home can be more productive, but I think that there's a balance. Have you seen anything? Have you seen companies do things? I mean, outside of Certn, have you seen companies that have done things that help mitigate that?
Yeah, there's a few companies that come to mind, and it's really about that intentionality. Like, I think the one thing that they all have in common is being extremely intentional about what does it mean to be together? Like, what are we trying to achieve? How are we going to do that? And what does it look like for our organization? And one that comes to mind who's been gathering in a neat way. And I don't work there. I don't know what the outcome of that looks like, but externally facing seems really cool is Policy Me, where they do get together on like a team basis. They have, for example, let's say it's quarterly, they get together. So they have that offsite, super intentional about what they're trying to achieve in that space. And then company-wide, they have an offsite once or twice a year or something like that. But super intentional around, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And then other than that, this is how we connect in those other spaces. Priya Parker has this book, I believe, and it's kind of like the art of gathering. And that also kind of leads to like, why and when and how are we doing these things and what does that look like? So those are kind of some areas where I've found that makes sense. Like also having different kind of offices, satellite offices where people can come together. And we kind of have that in a few of our different areas too, where we encourage folks to come in to the office to connect and work when it makes sense with your teams within that region. And I think that can be super supportive for being able to get together, because it's hard. Like I think we went through a time during COVID anyways, where we're trying all of the things. We're doing the online workouts at lunch together. We're doing bingo games. We're doing a ton of activities, like to the point where we got huge burnout of being on a screen. Like, I don't want to be on the screen. I just want to hang out at home after work, or hang out with my friends, go out and do something. I don't want to be at a screen pretending to interact with someone I've literally never met in person. There's only so much of that you can do. And so we tried to replicate it for a certain amount of time, but I don't think it's a sustainable thing to just expect that someone can continue to connect and collaborate forever virtually, never having met. There's just that huge kind of difference in my experience anyways with the teams. It's like people that I've met in person I'm able to disagree, to challenge much better than people I've never, ever met before. Just, yeah.
I completely agree. I mean, I think getting people together increases sense of belonging. Some of our team members were at a deal event last week. They must have spent a huge amount of money on getting the team together. And the people that we had there were asking the team at deal, do these things actually work, or are these just an expensive way to pretend everything is okay? And the feedback was definitely that building that rapport was critical, and it kind of recharges your batteries. You get together, and then once you've got that togetherness, it's easier to have those conversations and face those challenges with someone that's further apart, because you've built that relationship. I know for us this year, one of my main goals was to get people together more frequently. Kicked off the year, I brought the product design engineering team leaders to Mexico to an all-inclusive for the week. And the level of connection that I have built with some of those people is incredible. I mean, I've spent time with them in the past, in kind of group settings, close to their home or here in Victoria. But when you do one of those very intense, problem-focused, intentional sessions, it builds a whole different level of connection. So I think, if you're intentional, that's gonna deliver the results, as opposed to just like throwing a party.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the caveat, as I'm hearing you say this, like, I'm an extremely extroverted person, and so this is like, for me, my battery is absolutely recharged by meeting people. Like, I am ecstatic. And I would be curious. I don't think it takes away from the point. I do think people need to get together, but how that's done, making sure that we're taking into consideration different people's preferences. There's like, if it's just like activity after activity, like, I'm pumped. I'm there for it, but I don't know if everyone would be. Like, I know there's people who are a little bit more introverted, and they actually do need time to recharge that battery before they're recharging it at work. Does that make sense?
Totally. Well, that's what I like to call forced fun. Like you can't have these events and be like, okay, you're forced to have fun. You're forced to drink the Kool-Aid. The WeWork summer camp videos are really great for a certain type of people, but you also have to be accommodating to the people that, this isn't the thing that gets them excited. And I think that's where like rallying people around a problem or we're trying to get to a solution is really important, because for different personality types, you can kind of all come together, and you don't have to have everybody go to whatever
dinner.
That
laser tag.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't like laser tag?
I know how to do that.
That's crazy. That's just
bowling.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of give people the option to go do those things, and you're really intentional about the things that you do. And then also giving people breaks. So when we did our last session, we planned every day to have 2.5 hours in the middle of the day every day for people to break, to end up going and doing the work that they needed to do, or to recharge their batteries. I'd like to say it worked, but nobody took the 2.5 hour break, because we were all so engaged in the work that we were doing that it was unanimous. It was like, okay, we're not taking a break. Like, we're on to something here, which is awesome. But I think, building in those types of breaks so that people can, if they prefer to recharge away from people, that gives them the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super helpful, because I've heard that in some company offsites and from people who participated in them. It's just like activity after activity after activity. I'm like, that sounds fantastic, but not for everyone. So yeah.
No, especially, I mean, under the guise of team building, like you actually, sometimes there's team building in the work. There's team building in solving the challenge, not some artificial challenge that might not resonate with everybody. And I think if you're doing it like in a much larger group, you can get away with having sort of different options. But when you're doing smaller groups, I think it's important to have that time, because they are intense. Anytime you're going anywhere, and this might just be my expectation, anytime you're going anywhere for for business, whether it be like, a company offsite or retreat or whatever you want to call it, like there is a level of intensity because I mean, you still have work that's building up behind you. Like, there's all these pressures. And if you don't build in those breaks and those time, it becomes like that was fun. Then you leave and you're like, I'm actually like in a worse place from a stress perspective than I was when I left. And that's that forced fun at the expense of your sanity when you get home.
Yeah, and your team probably as well, right? Like you showing up back to your team not recharged, or in this case, for example, like if someone's not able to find that time to recharge, then they're just showing up as not their best version of themselves future into the work, right? Like there kind of has to be that balance of like being able to recharge, doing some great work, and then coming back energized and excited to execute on that work.
Totally. So, I mean, Maya, what would you do? Like if you were to start a company from scratch, what does that look like? What does it look like? Where are people? How do you get together?
I think I would probably start something in Victoria. I think there's some phenomenal talent in Victoria. Let's go back 10 years from now, potentially. And then there's also a lot of, like, I'm time traveling 10 years ago, and there's phenomenal talent. There's lots of opportunity. I could argue that it's probably starting to not be the case anymore. But in the sense that there's just so many organizations, so many companies in Victoria that have just grown so big. But yeah, I have no idea. I'm putting it to you.
That talent is still there. That talent is still there. It's in fact that talent has now grown and developed, and that would be different. I think so. I'll take sort of my like utopian example.
Okay.
I would start a company in a tax haven where there's really great waves, and then I would convince everyone to co-locate for the first couple of years. And I say that because, well, one, you can build really strong relationships with people. Like I feel like when we started Certn, that kind of happened. Victoria's not a tax haven, so like that's a different story. But how much more runway would you have if your team wasn't paying half their income in taxes, right? Like, so when we started Certn, it was here on the island. I moved to Victoria to start Certn, and it was a cool experience for me because like my peers were my friends. Like that, like those are the only people I knew. Like, I mean, even today when we talk about Victoria, like I've imported all of my friends to the island. So like, my daughter said the other day, like, do you have any friends that don't work for you? And it's like, I have one, and he did work for me. Or like I've got a couple that have worked for me in the past. But I think it would be really cool to do that, like summer travel, especially for those like first few years. Like we were so close, like everything that happened, we moved so quickly. Like, there was no outside distractions. And I mean, even still, I started the company with my two best friends and one of them, like we have kids, we have kids at the same time. We don't have kids together. We had kids at the same time, same day, same hospital,
basically.
Not together. The chemistry, the biology does not work for that. But there is that like sense of togetherness. So like I would love to do that. But again, that's like my utopian, like, import the best talent to like, some tropical island that has to have surf, that has low taxes and good internet, and, build the dream. And then eventually, you disperse. Cause I don't know what it's like to live on a, tropical island tax haven for a long period of time. But I know in those like early days, you're so focused on like cool stuff that you're doing that.
Yeah.
Surfing and your friends.
I love that. I think, and it makes sense. Like you're probably the most entrepreneurial person I know. That is just like at every single side and corner, you're starting a new thing. You have a new idea. You have a new opportunity. You're bringing someone in. So it totally makes sense that, that you love that kind of like initial phase where you're all working so hard together on the same problem, challenging, and being able to see the impact like of that work and effort. I could totally see this for you, and the surfing and the sun, and
Well, and yeah, that to bring it back to like the original question. Like that's at a very small scale. So like, how do we create that on a larger scale by getting groups of people or whole companies together to solve problems? preferably in a tropical place on a regular basis.
So Andy, I'm really curious about this one thing. I'm going to put a question to you, put you in the hot seat, but I'm curious, have you thought and considered, are we bringing people back to the office? Is that something that you've considered?
Yes. So, yes, I have considered it. I think for the size of the company and where we are, it doesn't make sense to have everybody come back to the office, but I do like having spaces where people can get together and co-locating people. I am also a big fan of carrots over sticks. So how do you get people back to the office? Now, it hasn't gone very well so far. The plan was to have a lunch program where anyone, the pilot was basically give people who come back to the office in Victoria free lunch. And that was
how's that going?
Terribly. We had no heat for 2 months in the coldest, and that's your fault, by the way. The heat breaks everywhere you go. It's Maya's fault that the heat broke for like 2 months. It was I have so many layers, and I'm now sweating in this room because the space heater that I had to have prior to that, it's just now it's too hot. But at least I'm not wearing gloves. Like I had a performance review, and I was fully wearing gloves. I couldn't take notes. Thankfully we have the AI note takers now because I couldn't type. It hurt.
I remember going into the office. I was like, I'm going to brave the cold today. I got this. I went in and left immediately. I was just like, this is not for me. I'll go and be cold at home instead.
It was probably the biggest return to the office fail I think I could have possibly imagined.
So if you could do it again, what might you approach differently? Actually,
I would do the same thing, except I would make sure the heat worked. I wouldn't start it like right at the beginning of a new year in the winter. And I think that we probably need more resources around executing on the initiatives. But that's obviously, if I'm going to do that right now, that's like, a 90-day ramp up. So once we have the new expense management system, the heat got fixed last week, which is great. So like I am in the office and I am wearing a vest, but I am sweating, which is good. I'd rather be sweating than freezing. And then, I think food will be the
motivator.
Yeah.
That's great. That's fantastic. What about some people who are not motivated by food?
We'll get them.
I mean, I am, but
I don't want to make it mandatory that people come back to the office. Like I would like small clusters of people that are making decisions on a day-to-day basis to be together. And that's really the goal. And I know that here in Victoria, at least, they're motivated by food.
I think something that I recall, this was a long time ago, but we used to have kind of sports days almost on Wednesdays. And it was kind of an after work moment in the summer. And I feel like everyone came into the office, and I'm not saying everyone, let's do sports, but that was a fun thing, as we had something after work that everyone would come to work on that day because we were all doing something after,
We should
bring them back.
Yeah, we should bring those back. And we should also, we should track some data on that. Because I also feel like a lot of people come back on days where we celebrate other people leaving the company. Someone graduates to a new job and positive, somebody gets a new job, a big promotion, a new place, which is awesome. I mean, alumni are incredible and so valuable, and we learned so much from them. And sometimes they come back, which is great. But yeah, I just think we're doing drinks because somebody's moving on and everybody comes in. It's so either we need to organize drinks. Maybe we need to move into a WeWork where they have free beer and people will come in more.
True. Maybe they need to bring a WeWork to Victoria, or we could go to Quench.
Do they have free drinks?
I think they do, actually. And I think they also have 12 different ways to make your coffee, as if that's possible. I know you're not a coffee drinker, but 12 different options. Perhaps overload of options, but they do have some really cool things actually at Quench. We should do a day where people do a little exploratory mission to Quench for the whole Victoria office, and maybe we'll all get together there.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Perfect. Let's do it.
with that, probably a good time to wrap up and say thank you for such an awesome conversation. Your insights in making us all think differently about how we get people together have been awesome. This was super fun. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to subscribe, give us a like, a review, share it with your team. We'll be back soon with more real talk on the future of work. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.